Hey, good evening and welcome back to Answers on Eschatology. My name is Dan Derry and I'm the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. Hey, I want to share some concluding thoughts on the parable of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25, and I hope in tomorrow's video we can wrap up our study on the Olivet Discourse. So what I want to try to share tonight is the scope of this judgment we see in Matthew 25. And I'll say up front, I believe this is the judgment of all Israel, and this judgment obviously is the judgment according to their works. It is the judgment of Matthew 16, 27, 28, where every man is judged according to their works at the coming of the Son of Man. Okay? Same coming, same judgment. But here's the thing. They would be judged according to their works based upon, number one, their obedience to the gospel of the kingdom. That's a given. But number two, as we're going to see, they would be judged according to whether or not they received and accepted and were hospitable to those ministers and messengers who preached that gospel. Okay? So Matthew 25:31, we're going to read some text here and then jump to Matthew 10, and hopefully this video will help us better understand this judgment of works that we see in the New Testament. And I'll say this too before we get going. I believe it's this simple. The way Jesus determined this judgment at his coming to be was that if you received his messengers, you automatically received the gospel. If you didn't receive the messengers, you didn't receive the gospel. That's how he could judge according to works. Are you with me? It's just a foregone conclusion. Those who received the gospel received the messengers of the gospel. Those who were not hospitable and turned away those messengers, well, they probably didn't receive the gospel. Are you with me? And we're going to show this as we go. Matthew 25:31 and following. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. And all the nations, that is all Israel, will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." And here's the criteria of their judgment. Verse 35, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will say to him, answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" See, this is an obvious question. The Lord was not with them at this time of this commission where they were receiving and preaching this gospel. He was in heaven. He had ascended. So they're asking the Lord, when did we do these things? And here's his answer. The king will answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these my brothers, one of these brothers of mine, even to the least of them, you did it to me." So here's the answer. You did these things to me. You received me by receiving these brothers of mine. And these brothers of mine, as I'm going to try to demonstrate, were the ministers and the messengers of the gospel. They carried the gospel, and by receiving these messengers, you received the gospel, and you received me. Are you with me? Now let's go to Matthew chapter 10. I'll try to bring this home a little bit better. In Matthew 10, verses 1 through 5, we see Jesus commissioning the 12 apostles. They are sent out on an immediate mission, and they're told to go to the house of Israel, okay? Only to the lost sheep of Israel, and they are to preach the gospel of the kingdom. Then as we go down further, this ministry and this commission is extended as we see in the context. Notice in verse 16 and following, this takes place obviously beyond this immediate mission. As we'll see, watch this. "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. But beware of men, for they will hand you over the courts and scourge you in their synagogues." Now see, obviously, no one had been scourged in synagogues. No one had been handed over to courts and priests prior to Christ's crucifixion. So this takes place after. Jesus is now extending a commission to them that they would to embark on after his crucifixion. Verse 18, "And you will even be brought before governors and kings for my sake, and as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles," see, to the nations. "But when they hand you over, do not worry about how or what you are to say, For it will be given you in that hour what you are to say. For it is not you who speak, but it is the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. This is the empowering of the Holy Spirit, which will come after Pentecost, to fulfill the Great Commission. Verse 21, brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. I got to slow down a little bit. And children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. So this commission endures to the end. That's the end of the age of Matthew 24:3, etc., right? Matthew 24:14 as well. This is the Great Commission that extends to the end of the age. But whenever they persecute you in one city, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. This is his parousia. So as we see, these 12 would go out, they would preach this gospel, they would be persecuted, but those who would endure to the end would be saved. Now watch this. In verses 32 to 39, we see what I believe to be the judgment of Matthew 25 being worked out and being prophesied in this text. Look at verse 32 and following. Therefore, anyone who confesses me before men, I will also confess him before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny him before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be the members of his household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. And he who has found his life will lose it, and he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. By the way, just a comparison, you compare Matthew 38 through 40 with Matthew 16, 24 through 27, and this is identical. This is the judgment of Matthew 16 according to their deeds. It is the judgment of Matthew 25 prior to the end of the age. Now watch this. In verse 40, he receives you, receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. Now right here is, I believe, the key to Matthew 25. Jesus sends out his 12. They are to go and preach the gospel of the kingdom to Israel. Okay? They would be persecuted for that message, and those who to receive them would receive Christ. And those who to receive Christ would automatically receive them and their message. And watch verse 41. He who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. Whoa, did you hear what he said? They're going to be rewarded by receiving these apostles and prophets, his ministers, his messengers. He who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. Why? Because if they receive them, they receive the message. And if they receive the message, they receive Jesus. Are you with me? Those who would receive his apostles, those who would receive his messengers, and those who carried the message of the gospel received the kingdom. They would be rewarded for their obedience and for their hospitality to the ministers of the gospel. They would be rewarded with the kingdom. They are the sheep who are gathered to the right hand, who inherit the kingdom. In verse 42, we'll wrap up Matthew 10. And whoever in the name of a disciple gives to one of these little ones even a cup of cold water to drink, truly I say to you, he shall not lose his reward. See, we need to understand this judgment of works as the hospitality to the messengers of the gospel. See, those who would invite these preachers in and give them a cup of water and serve them and wash their feet, what were they doing? They were receiving the gospel. Earlier in this text, we didn't read it, but Jesus said, those who don't open their doors to you, shake off the dust of your feet and walk away, because it's going to be worse for them than Sodom in Egypt, or Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment. But those who would open their house, who would give these messengers even a cup of water, they would not lose the reward. Why? Because they, by receiving the apostles, by receiving these ministers and messengers of the kingdom, they were receiving that gospel. And by receiving the gospel and the message of the gospel, they were receiving Christ. Are you with me? This judgment in Matthew 25:31 and following, at the coming of the Son of Man, at the end of the age, was the judgment and the separation of all Israel according to whether or not they received the gospel, by whether or not they received the ministers and the messengers of that gospel, and how they treated them. And they were judged according to those works at the end of the old age in AD 70. Well, we'll pick it up tomorrow, and hopefully we can wrap everything up and summarize this beautiful, beautiful prophecy next time on Answers in Eschatology. We'll see you then.